The sun rose over the lush, rolling hills of Sarangani province, casting a golden glow on the rice paddies and coconut groves that stretched as far as the eye could see. For decades, these lands had been the lifeblood of countless Filipino families, yet the farmers who toiled here often lived in quiet struggle. Among them was Renato, a 52-year-old rice farmer who had inherited his small plot of land from his father. The soil beneath his feet was rich, but Renato's life had been anything but. Years of unpredictable weather, rising costs, and outdated farming techniques had left him barely able to provide for his wife, Ligaya, and their 3 children. Renato's story was not unique. Across the Philippines, small-scale farmers like him were the backbone of the nation's agriculture, yet they often found themselves trapped in cycles of debt and poverty. It was a reality that Manny Pacquiao, now a retired boxing legend and senator, knew all too well. Born into poverty in General Santos City, Manny had seen firsthand the struggles of farmers and laborers in his community. Though his fists had earned him global fame and fortune, his heart had never left the people of his homeland. It was during a visit to Sarangani, where he had spent much of his childhood, that Manny first encountered the depth of the crisis. He had been invited to speak at a local school, but as he drove through the countryside, he noticed the weary faces of farmers working under the scorching sun. Their tools were old, their clothes tattered, and their fields yielded less than they once had. Manny felt a pang of guilt. He had risen above his circumstances, but what about those who had been left behind? That evening, Manny sat with his wife, Jinky, in their family home. They discussed the plight of the farmers and the growing need for sustainable solutions. Jinky, always a pillar of support, encouraged Manny to act. "You've been given so much," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "Maybe it's time to give back in a way that lasts." Inspired by their conversation, Manny began to envision a program that would not only provide immediate relief to struggling farmers, but also empower them to build better futures. He reached out to agricultural experts, local leaders, and even international organizations to design an initiative that would address the root causes of the farmers' struggles. The result was the Family Farmers Empowerment Program, a comprehensive effort aimed at providing training, modern equipment, and access to markets for small-scale farmers across the Philippines. Renato was one of the first to hear about the program. At first, he was skeptical. Over the years, he had seen many promises made and broken by politicians and organizations alike. But something about this initiative felt different. Perhaps it was the name behind it, Manny Pacquiao, a man who had never forgotten his roots. Or perhaps it was the way the program was introduced, with local coordinators visiting each community to listen to the farmers' needs rather than dictate solutions. When Renato attended the program's first workshop, he was struck by the sense of hope in the air. The trainers spoke about crop diversification, sustainable practices, and financial literacy, concepts that were new to many but held the promise of transformation. Renato was particularly moved by a young agronomist named Angelo, who had returned to Sarangani after studying abroad. Angelo's passion for helping his fellow Filipinos was contagious, and his practical advice made the seemingly complex ideas feel achievable. As Renato walked back to his home that evening, he felt a flicker of optimism he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, he allowed himself to dream of a future where his children wouldn't have to leave the farm to find a better life. Perhaps, he thought, the seeds of hope were finally being planted. The Family Farmers Empowerment Program quickly became the talk of Sarangani. Word spread from one barangay to another, carried by the voices of hopeful farmers and their families. For many, as it was the first time they felt seen and heard. The program wasn't just about farming techniques. It was about restoring dignity to a way of life that had been undervalued for far too long. And at the heart of it all was Manny Pacquiao, whose presence alone inspired trust and belief. Renato attended every workshop the program offered, often bringing Ligaya and their eldest son, Carlo, along. The sessions were held in community centers, where farmers gathered to share their experiences and learn from one another. It wasn't long before Renato began to notice a shift, not just in himself, but in the people around him. Farmers who had once been hesitant to speak up were now voicing their ideas and concerns. There was a newfound sense of camaraderie, a belief that they were all in this together. One of the most impactful aspects of the program was the introduction of cooperatives. Farmers were encouraged to pool their resources, share equipment, and collectively negotiate better prices for their crops. Renato was initially unsure about the idea. He had always worked independently, relying on his own instincts and labor. But Angelo, the young agronomist who had become a trusted figure in the community, explained the benefits in a way that resonated with him. "Renato," Angelo said one afternoon, as they stood by the edge of a rice field, "you've been carrying this burden alone for so long. Imagine what could happen if we all carried it together. A single grain of rice is fragile, but a sack of rice is strong." The cooperative model wasn't just about economics, it was about rebuilding a sense of community that had been eroded by years of hardship. Farmers began to see themselves not as competitors, but as partners in a shared mission. They started organizing planting schedules, sharing irrigation systems, and even setting up a small fund to help members in times of need. For Renato, who had always prided himself on his independence, the experience was humbling but deeply rewarding. Meanwhile, Manny Pacquiao made it a point to visit the communities involved in the program. He didn't come with an entourage or a media crew. He came as a fellow Filipino, eager to listen and learn. During one visit, he sat with a group of farmers under the shade of a mango tree, asking them about their challenges and aspirations. His humility and genuine concern left a lasting impression. Renato was among those who spoke that day. He shared his story of struggle and resilience, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. Manny listened intently, nodding as Renato described the impact the program was already having on his family. When Renato finished, Manny placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Your story is why we're doing this. Together, we'll make sure no farmer is left behind." The program also brought unexpected opportunities. Local schools began incorporating agricultural education into their curriculums, teaching children about the importance of farming and sustainability. Ligaya, who had always dreamed of being a teacher, volunteered to help with the lessons. She found joy in sharing her knowledge and watching the children's eyes light up as they learned about the land that sustained them. As the weeks turned into months, the changes in Sarangani became impossible to ignore. Fields that had once been neglected were now thriving with diverse crops. Farmers who had been on the brink of giving up were now planning for the future. And families like Renato's were beginning to see the fruits of their labor, not just in their harvests, but in their renewed sense of purpose. One evening, as Renato and Ligaya sat outside their home, watching the sun set over the hills, they reflected on how far they had come. The air was filled with the sounds of children playing and neighbors chatting, a stark contrast to the silence that had once dominated their lives. Renato turned to Ligaya and said, "It's not just the land that's changing, it's us. It's all of us." Ligaya smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "And it's only the beginning." The first harvest season under the Family Farmers Empowerment Program arrived with a mix of anticipation and nervous energy. For Renato and the other farmers, it was more than just a season. It was a test of everything they had learned and worked toward over the past months. The fields, now vibrant with a variety of crops, stood as a testament to their collective effort and newfound hope. Renato had decided to diversify his farm, planting not only rice but also vegetables like eggplant, tomatoes and okra. Angelo had explained that diversifying crops would not only improve soil health but also provide a safety net in case one crop failed. It was a bold move for someone who had spent his entire life growing only rice, but Renato trusted the process. He had seen the results in the demonstration plots set up by the program, where modern techniques and sustainable practices had yielded impressive results. As the harvest began, the community came together in a way that hadn't been seen in years. Farmers helped one another in the fields, sharing tools and labor. The cooperative had arranged for a small fleet of trucks to transport the produce to local markets, ensuring that the farmers wouldn't have to rely on middlemen who often took a large cut of their earnings. Renato's eldest son, Carlo, took charge of documenting the harvest, using a smartphone provided by the program to track yields and expenses. It was a small but significant step toward modernizing their operations. The first day of harvest was long and exhausting, but it ended with a celebration. Families gathered in the barangay hall, where tables were laden with food prepared from the very crops they had grown. There was laughter, music, and a sense of pride that was palpable. Renato, who had always been reserved, found himself standing before the crowd, sharing a few words of gratitude. "We've been through so much," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. But today we see what's possible when we work together. This harvest is not just about food, it's about hope. And for that, I thank all of you, and I thank Senator Pacquiao for believing in us. The crowd erupted in applause, and Renato felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that the future could be different, not just for him, but for his children and their children. Meanwhile, Manny Pacquiao was keeping a close eye on the program's progress. He received regular updates from Angelo and the other coordinators, who shared stories of farmers like Renato. These stories fueled Manny's determination to expand the initiative. He began reaching out to corporate sponsors and government agencies, leveraging his influence to secure additional funding and resources. His vision was clear: to create a model that could be replicated across the Philippines, transforming the lives of millions of farmers. One of the program's most significant milestones came when a group of farmers, including Renato, was invited to participate in a regional agricultural fair. It was an opportunity to showcase their produce and share their experiences with a wider audience. Renato was initially hesitant. He had never traveled beyond Sarangani, let alone spoken in front of strangers. But Angelo encouraged him, reminding him that his story could inspire others. At the fair, Renato stood beside a table filled with fresh vegetables and grains, each item labeled with the name of his barangay. Visitors stopped to admire the quality of the produce, asking questions about the techniques he had used. Renato spoke with a quiet confidence, sharing what he had learned and how it had changed his life. By the end of the day, he had not only sold out his stock, but also gained a sense of pride that was worth more than any amount of money. Back in Sarangani, the success of the harvest brought tangible changes to the community. Renato used part of his earnings to repair their home, which had been battered by years of neglect. Ligaya started a small side business selling homemade snacks at the local market, using ingredients from their farm. Carlo, inspired by the program, began dreaming of studying agriculture so he could one day help other farmers. As the season came to a close, Renato stood in his field, now empty but full of promise. The land that had once been a source of frustration and despair was now a symbol of resilience and renewal. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the struggles, the lessons, and the people who had made it all possible. And as he looked out over the hills, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, he whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning." The success of the Family Farmers Empowerment Program in Sarangani began to ripple outward, reaching neighboring provinces and sparking conversations across the nation. News outlets picked up the story, highlighting how a community of struggling farmers had turned their lives around with the help of Manny Pacquiao's initiative. The images of thriving fields, bustling markets, and smiling families painted a picture of hope that resonated deeply with Filipinos everywhere. For Renato, life had taken on a new rhythm. His days were still filled with hard work, but now there was purpose behind every task. He woke up before dawn to tend to his crops, often accompanied by Carlo, who had become his right-hand man. Ligaya's small snack business was flourishing, and her homemade banana chips were quickly becoming a local favorite. The family's youngest children, Maria and Thomas, often helped their mother after school, their laughter filling the air as they packed bags of snacks to sell at the market. The cooperative had also grown stronger. With the profits from the first harvest, the farmers invested in a shared warehouse where they could store their produce safely. They also purchased a small milling machine, allowing them to process their rice locally and sell it at a higher price. Renato, who had once been skeptical of the cooperative model, now found himself advocating for it. He often spoke at community meetings, sharing his experiences and encouraging others to join. One of the most significant changes came in the form of education. The program had partnered with local schools to provide scholarships for the children of farmers. Carlo, who had always dreamed of going to college but thought it was out of reach, was now preparing to enroll in an agricultural program at a university in General Santos City. Renato couldn't hide his pride as he watched his son pack his bags, knowing that Carlo's education would not only benefit their family, but also the entire community. Meanwhile, Manny Pacquiao continued to champion the program on a national level. He spoke about it during Senate sessions, urging his colleagues to prioritize agricultural reform. His speeches were passionate and grounded in the stories of farmers like Renato, whose lives had been transformed. Manny's efforts caught the attention of international organizations, some of which offered to partner with the program to expand its reach. One such organization was a global non-profit focused on sustainable agriculture. They sent a team of experts to Sarangani to study the program and provide additional support. Among them was a young woman named Leilani, a Filipino-American agronomist who had spent years working on similar initiatives in Africa and South America. Leilani's expertise and enthusiasm quickly made her a valuable asset to the program. She worked closely with Angelo and the farmers, introducing new techniques and technologies that further improved their yields. Leilani was particularly impressed by Renato's dedication. During one of her visits to his farm, she noticed how meticulously he had implemented the techniques he had learned. From crop rotation to organic fertilizers, Renato had embraced every aspect of the program. Leilani encouraged him to experiment with high-value crops like cacao and coffee, which could bring even greater profits. Renato was hesitant at first, but with her guidance, he decided to dedicate a small portion of his land to the new crops. As the months went by, the changes in Sarangani became even more evident. The local economy was thriving, with new businesses springing up to support the growing agricultural sector. Young people who had once left the province in search of better opportunities were now returning, inspired by the success of the program. The barangay hall, once a quiet and underutilized space, had become a hub of activity, hosting workshops, meetings, and celebrations. Renato often found himself reflecting on how far they had come. One evening, as he sat with Ligaya on their newly repaired porch, he said, "Do you remember how we used to worry about the future? About how we would feed the kids, how we would keep the farm alive?" Ligaya nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I remember, but look at us now. Look at what we've built, not just for ourselves, but for everyone." Renato smiled, his heart full. "It's not just us. It's the program, the community, and people like Manny and Angelo and Leilani. They believed in us when we didn't believe in ourselves." As they watched the stars fill the night sky, Renato felt a deep sense of gratitude. The program had given them more than just tools and training, it had given them a future. And as he thought about the next planting season, the new crops, and the opportunities that lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. The seeds they had planted were only the beginning of something much greater. The transformation in Sarangani was no longer just a local story. It had become a national phenomenon, capturing the attention of Filipinos from all walks of life. News programs aired segments showcasing the thriving farms, bustling markets, and the renewed spirit of the community. Social media was flooded with posts about the Family Farmers Empowerment Program, with hashtags like Seeds of Hope and Farmers First trending nationwide. For many, the story of Sarangani was a reminder of the resilience and potential of the Filipino people. Manny Pacquiao's role in the program was widely celebrated, but he remained humble, deflecting praise back to the farmers themselves. "This is their victory," he said during an interview. "I may have provided the tools, but they are the ones who worked tirelessly to change their lives. They are the true champions." Renato's story, in particular, resonated with many. A local journalist, impressed by his journey, visited Sarangani to document his life. The article, titled "From Struggle to Success, A Farmer's Journey," was published in a major newspaper and quickly went viral. It detailed Renato's early struggles, his initial skepticism about the program, and the profound changes it had brought to his family and community. The piece included photos of Renato standing proudly in his field, Ligaya selling her snacks at the market, and Carlo preparing for his first day at university. The article brought a wave of visitors to Sarangani, journalists, government officials, and even celebrities who wanted to see the program in action. Renato found himself in the unexpected position of being a spokesperson for the initiative. Though he was naturally shy, he spoke with sincerity and passion, sharing his experiences and emphasizing the importance of community and collaboration. One of the visitors was a prominent businessman named Eduardo, who owned a chain of supermarkets across the Philippines. Eduardo was deeply moved by what he saw in Sarangani and offered to partner with the cooperative to sell their produce in his stores. The deal was a game changer, providing the farmers with a stable and lucrative market for their crops. Renato and the other members of the cooperative celebrated the partnership, knowing it would bring even greater opportunities for their families. Meanwhile, the program continued to expand. With additional funding from corporate sponsors and international organizations, new communities were brought into the fold. Angelo and Leilani worked tirelessly to train coordinators in other provinces, sharing the lessons they had learned in Sarangani. The program's success also inspired other initiatives, from fisheries in coastal areas to reforestation projects in upland regions. Back in Sarangani, Renato was preparing for another milestone, the first harvest of his cacao and coffee crops. Leilani had been right about their potential. The plants had thrived under Renato's care, and the cooperative had already secured buyers for the high-value products. Renato was both excited and nervous. He had never grown anything like cacao or coffee before, but the support from the program and his fellow farmers gave him confidence. The harvest day was a community event, with neighbors and friends coming together to help. As Renato picked the ripe cacao pods and coffee cherries, he couldn't help but marvel at how far he had come. The land that had once been a source of frustration and despair was now a symbol of possibility. He thought about his father, who had worked the same soil but never had the opportunities Renato now had. "This is for you, Tatai," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. The success of the cacao and coffee harvest brought even more attention to Sarangani. Buyers praised the quality of the products, and the cooperative received orders from as far away as Manila and Cebu. Renato used his earnings to invest in his farm, purchasing new tools and expanding his operations. Ligaya's business also benefited as she began incorporating cacao into her snacks, creating a line of chocolate-covered banana chips that quickly became a hit. As the community celebrated their achievements, Manny Pacquiao returned to Sarangani for a special event. The barangay hall was filled with farmers and their families, all eager to express their gratitude. Manny, ever humble, took the stage and spoke from the heart. "This program is not just about farming," he said. "It's about hope, resilience, and the power of working together. You have shown the entire nation what is possible when we believe in ourselves and in each other. I am proud to stand with you, not as a senator or a boxer, but as a fellow Filipino." The crowd erupted in applause, and Renato felt a surge of pride. He looked around at the faces of his neighbors, people who had once been weighed down by hardship, but now stood tall with confidence and hope. As the event ended and the community gathered for a shared meal, Renato thought about the journey that had brought them here. The road had been long and difficult, but it had been worth every step. And as he watched Manny Pacquiao shake hands and share laughs with the farmers, Renato realized something profound. The seeds they had planted were not just in the soil, they were in their hearts, their minds, and their dreams for the future. As the Family Farmers Empowerment Program continued to grow, so did the challenges that came with it. Success had brought attention, but it also brought scrutiny. Some critics questioned whether the program's results could be sustained in the long term, while others accused it of favoring certain communities over others. Manny Pacquiao, ever the fighter, faced these criticisms head-on, using every opportunity to defend the farmers and the program's mission. "This is not about politics or profit," he said during a Senate session. "This is about people, our people, and their right to a better life." In Sarangani, the farmers were also facing their own set of challenges. The weather, unpredictable as ever, brought heavy rains that flooded some fields and delayed the planting season. Renato's rice crops were particularly affected, and he found himself worrying about whether he would be able to recover. The cooperative, however, proved to be a lifeline. Members pooled their resources to help those who had been hardest hit, sharing seeds, tools, and labor to ensure that no one was left behind. Angelo and Leilani worked tirelessly to support the farmers during this difficult time. They organized workshops on climate-resilient farming techniques, teaching the community how to adapt to the changing conditions. Renato, who had always been eager to learn, attended every session. He began experimenting with new methods, such as planting flood-resistant rice varieties and using natural barriers to protect his fields from erosion. Though the work was challenging, Renato felt a renewed sense of determination. He had faced hardship before, and he knew that giving up was not an option. The cooperative also began exploring ways to diversify their income streams. Inspired by Ligaya's success with her snack business, other farmers started creating value-added products from their crops. Some turned their surplus vegetables into pickles and sauces, while others began producing coconut oil and dried fruits. The barangay hall was transformed into a bustling hub of activity, with farmers and their families working together to package and label their goods. Renato and Ligaya, always eager to support their community, offered their help and advice to anyone who needed it. Despite the challenges, the program continued to bring positive changes to Sarangani. The partnership with Eduardo's supermarket chain expanded, with more products from the cooperative making their way onto store shelves across the country. Renato's cacao and coffee crops, now in their second harvest, were fetching even higher prices thanks to their growing reputation for quality. The cooperative used the profits to invest in new equipment, including solar-powered dryers and a small processing facility for cacao beans. One of the most rewarding moments for Renato came when Carlo returned home from university during a school break. Carlo, now in his second year of studying agriculture, was brimming with ideas and enthusiasm. He spent hours walking through the fields with his father, sharing what he had learned about sustainable farming and innovative technologies. Renato listened intently, proud of how far his son had come. Carlo's education was not just a personal achievement, it was a symbol of the opportunities that the program had created for the next generation. As the community worked to overcome their challenges, Manny Pacquiao made another visit to Sarangani. This time, he brought with him a group of government officials and corporate leaders, hoping to inspire them to support similar initiatives in other parts of the country. The visitors were impressed by what they saw: thriving farms, empowered farmers, and a community that had come together to create lasting change. During a meeting with the cooperative, one of the officials asked Renato what he thought was the key to the program's success. Renato paused for a moment, then said, "It's not just about the tools or the training. It's about believing in ourselves and in each other. For so long we felt forgotten, like our work didn't matter. But this program reminded us that we are important, that we have the power to change our lives." The official nodded, clearly moved by Renato's words. Manny, sitting nearby, smiled and said, "That's exactly why we're here, to remind every farmer, every Filipino that they matter." As the meeting ended and the visitors prepared to leave, Renato felt a sense of pride and responsibility. The program had given him and his community so much, but it was up to them to keep it going. He thought about the challenges they had faced, the floods, the doubts, the hard work, and realized that each obstacle had only made them stronger. That evening, as the sun set over the hills of Sarangani, Renato stood in his field, watching the golden light dance across the rows of crops. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the people who had supported him, and the future that lay ahead. And as he looked out over the land that had once been a source of struggle but was now a symbol of hope, he whispered to himself, "We're just getting started." The morning air in Sarangani carried a crispness that hinted at a new season. For Renato, it was more than just the changing weather. It was a reminder of how far they had come and how much further they could go. The Family Farmers Empowerment Program had turned their lives around, but Renato knew that true success wasn't measured by a single harvest or even a single year. It was about building something that would last for generations. The cooperative had grown into a well-oiled machine, with farmers working together like never before. Renato had been elected as one of the leaders, a role he never imagined for himself. Though he was initially hesitant to take on the responsibility, Angelo had encouraged him, saying, "You're not just a farmer anymore, Renato. You're a leader. And leaders inspire others to dream bigger." As part of his new role, Renato began mentoring younger farmers, many of whom were just starting their journeys. One of them was a 23-year-old named Isagani, who had recently inherited a small plot of land from his grandfather. Isagani was eager but inexperienced, and Renato saw a reflection of his younger self in the boy's wide-eyed determination. Together, they walked through Isagani's fields, discussing everything from soil health to crop rotation. Renato shared not just his knowledge but also his story, hoping to instill in Isagani the same sense of hope and resilience that the program had given him. Meanwhile, Carlo was making waves at university. His professors often praised his dedication and innovative ideas, and he had even won a small grant to fund a research project on sustainable farming practices. During one of his visits home, Carlo gathered the farmers in the barangay hall to present his findings. Using a projector borrowed from the university, he explained how simple changes, like planting cover crops or using organic compost, could significantly improve yields and protect the environment. The farmers listened intently, their faces lighting up with curiosity and excitement. Renato couldn't have been prouder. Watching his son stand confidently before the community, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Carlo's success was proof that the sacrifices they had made were worth it. But more than that, it was a sign that the future of farming in Sarangani was in good hands. The program also began focusing on the role of women in agriculture. Ligaya, who had become a respected figure in the community thanks to her thriving snack business, was invited to lead workshops on entrepreneurship. She taught other women how to turn their skills into income-generating opportunities, sharing tips on everything from budgeting to marketing. Ligaya's sessions were always lively, filled with laughter and camaraderie. For many of the women, it was the first time they felt empowered to contribute to their families' livelihoods in such a meaningful way. One of Ligaya's most enthusiastic students was a woman named Marites, who had recently started making herbal teas from the plants in her backyard. With Ligaya's guidance, Marites developed a brand for her teas and began selling them at the local market. Her success inspired other women to explore their own ideas, creating a ripple effect that strengthened the entire community. As Sarangani continued to thrive, Manny Pacquiao remained deeply involved. He visited regularly, often bringing his wife, Jinky, and their children along. During one visit, Manny organized a tree planting event to promote environmental sustainability. Farmers and their families gathered to plant hundreds of seedlings, from fruit-bearing trees to native hardwoods. Renato and his family joined in, their hands covered in soil as they worked side by side with their neighbors. As they planted, Manny spoke to the crowd about the importance of thinking long-term. "These trees won't grow overnight," he said, his voice steady and full of conviction. "But one day they'll provide shade, fruit, and timber for our children and grandchildren. Just like this program, it's about planting the seeds today so that the future can be brighter." Renato couldn't help but reflect on those words as he dug a hole for his seedling. He thought about his own journey, from the days of barely scraping by to now being part of something much larger than himself. The tree he was planting felt symbolic, a representation of the legacy they were building, not just for their families, but for the entire community. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the farmers gathered for a simple meal under the stars. There was a sense of unity and purpose that went beyond words. Renato looked around at the faces of his neighbors, people who had once been strangers, but were now like family. He thought about the challenges they had faced, the lessons they had learned, and the dreams they had dared to pursue. As the night wore on, Angelo approached Renato and sat beside him. "You've come a long way," Angelo said, his voice filled with admiration. "But I think the best part is that you've shown everyone what's possible." Renato smiled, his heart full. "It's not just me," he said. "It's all of us, and we're just getting started." The stars above seemed to shine brighter that night, as if reflecting the hope and determination that filled the hearts of everyone in Sarangani. The seeds they had planted, both in the soil and in their lives, were growing into something extraordinary. And as Renato closed his eyes, he felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the future they had dreamed of was finally within reach. The years passed, and Sarangani blossomed into a beacon of progress and resilience. What had started as a small initiative to empower struggling farmers had grown into a movement that inspired communities across the Philippines. The Family Farmers Empowerment Program became a model for agricultural reform, replicated in provinces from Luzon to Mindanao. But for Renato, the heart of the story was still the land he had worked on for decades, the land that had given him both hardship and hope. Renato's farm was now a thriving example of sustainable agriculture. His cacao and coffee crops had gained a reputation for their exceptional quality, attracting buyers from across the country and even abroad. The cooperative had expanded its operations, building a larger processing facility and hiring more workers from the community. Renato often found himself mentoring not just young farmers like Isagani, but also visitors from other provinces who came to learn from Sarangani's success. Carlo had graduated from university with honors and returned home, eager to put his knowledge to use. Together with Angelo and Leilani, he launched a series of workshops on advanced farming techniques, bringing cutting-edge practices to the community. Carlo's passion for innovation was infectious, and his ideas helped the farmers increase their yields while reducing their environmental impact. Renato couldn't have been prouder of his son, who had become a leader in his own right. Ligaya's snack business had also grown, evolving from a small market stall into a full-fledged enterprise. Her chocolate-covered banana chips, made with cacao from Renato's farm, were now sold in supermarkets and specialty stores across the Philippines. Ligaya had hired several women from the community to help with production, creating jobs and empowering others to follow in her footsteps. She often joked that while Renato grew the crops, she turned them into gold. The family's success was mirrored by the entire community. Sarangani had become a hub of activity, with new businesses, schools, and infrastructure transforming the once quiet province. The barangay hall, which had been the center of so many meetings and celebrations, was now a symbol of what they had achieved together. It was here that the farmers gathered one evening for a special event, a ceremony to honor the program's impact and the people who had made it possible. Manny Pacquiao stood at the front of the hall, his presence commanding but humble. He spoke about the journey they had all taken, from the early days of doubt and struggle to the thriving community they had built. "This is not just a story about farming," he said, his voice steady and full of emotion. "It's a story about faith, resilience, and the power of coming together. You have shown the nation and the world what is possible when we believe in ourselves and in each other." As Manny spoke, Renato felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He thought about the countless people who had played a role in their journey: Manny, Angelo, Leilani, Carlo, Ligaya, and every farmer who had dared to dream of a better future. He thought about the challenges they had faced, the lessons they had learned, and the bonds they had formed. And he thought about the land, which had been both their greatest challenge and their greatest gift. After the ceremony, the community gathered outside for a feast under the stars. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the aroma of freshly cooked food. Renato sat with his family, watching as the younger generation danced and played, their faces glowing with joy. He thought about his own childhood, about the struggles his parents had faced, and about how far they had come. The future, once uncertain, now felt full of promise. As the night wore on, Manny approached Renato and sat beside him. "You've done something incredible here," Manny said, his voice quiet but filled with admiration. "You've not only changed your life, you've changed the lives of everyone around you." Renato smiled, his eyes glistening with emotion. "I couldn't have done it alone," he said. "This community, this program, they gave me the tools and the hope I needed. And now it's our turn to pass it on." Manny nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's the beauty of it, isn't it? The seeds we plant today will grow into something far greater than we can imagine." As the stars sparkled above them, Renato felt a deep sense of peace. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had been worth every step. He thought about the trees they had planted, the fields they had cultivated, and the lives they had touched. And he knew that the legacy they were building would endure for generations to come. The next morning, as the sun rose over Sarangani, Renato stood in his field, the golden light illuminating the rows of crops. He felt the soil beneath his feet, rich and full of life, and he thought about the future. It wasn't just about his family or his farm, it was about the entire community, the nation, and the generations yet to come. With a quiet determination, Renato picked up his tools and began his work for the day. The land, the people, and the dream they had built together were worth every ounce of effort, and as he worked, he whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning." If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to our channel.